which gets Delta caught. And then Reed comes up and he's like, I'll take her to the general. And they were like, you said she was dead, dude. And he was like, I thought she was dead. She's magical. She went to the Verdant. She must be a goddess. And they're like, maybe. That sounds plausible.
Welcome, all of our listeners, to another episode of Unresolved Textual Tension. Today we're going to be talking about a very specific book, a very new book. And Maria, will you please introduce this book?
This week we are reading Dustborn by, I have completely forgotten the name of the author.
Erin Bowman, I think.
Yes,
Erin Bowman. I think you are right. Will had given me some choices. He was like, do you want this, this, this? And originally I picked the one I was interested in, which was Wrath and Dawn. You know how well that went for us. And so I was like, fine, let's do, because he goes Mad Max-esque. I don't know why, but that's not my go-to. Like, I'm not, like, I don't hear that and go, ooh, I'm super, I don't know why, given that Mad Max is one of my most favorite movies, and I've watched it a bajillion times, but it just...
I bought her the Blu-ray DVD.
We should state at the outset that we're all ridiculous fans of Fury Road. There will be so many comparisons.
I'm going to try to refrain from that for the express purpose of trying not to, just compare, because I thought about that during the interview I watched of Erin when she was, when the book release was happening and they were in I don't remember who was interviewing her, but somebody was, and she kind of didn't love that people but she understood because she too was inspired. But I'm going to try to refrain from that for the express purpose of trying to point out the unique features rather than the more formulaic ones. But yes,
I think there are some interesting contrasts between the two in terms of how to do it, and then also the plot becomes extremely reminiscent of Fury Road, so you almost kind of have to talk about it at points. But I think it's an interesting mode of analysis. It'll give us some variety.
Will, did you happen to watch Waterworld?
I did not.
He did not.
So,
I told him to.
For all of those who have watched Waterworld with Kevin Costner.
And Kevin Costner's butt.
Oh my God, that man. I had a thing for him when I was young.
Clearly I should have watched it.
You should have. He has gills.
In his butt?
Yeah, inside his butthole. Right on the,
I'm surprised that it didn't evolve into more of a motor jet, kind of like Squid. You know how they can squeeze water through?
Yes.
Exactly.
No, but no, back to my main point though. Waterworld with Kevin Costner was my favorite movie at the age of 8 up until probably far too long. And it is very reminiscent in certain very specific details. Now, whether or not she actually drew inspiration from her or not,
I can't imagine she didn't.
I mean, you never know. Look, tattoo on the back, which we'll get to, is a very common trope.
So I too have watched Waterworld. Katie introduced it to me. I'd never seen it before when I was in my early 20s. And I think this book, I will make comparisons, not a ton, between Waterworld and Mad Max Fury Road and this book, because I think this book is an interesting blend of both.
Yes, I would agree. I think it is a beautiful blend. Plus, some unique features, honestly. There was a twist in this book that I appreciated for once.
Oh, I wonder which twist.
Ooh, well, let's get into it, shall we?
Okay. So first, before we've said a lot of general comments, but how did you enjoy this book? Let's start with Will. You've said the least amount of words.
I thought that this was a decent but not exceptional book. I felt like it was a very formulaic YA story with a coating of Fury Road post-apocalyptic over it, kind of like the dusting they put on Doritos. It had a soupçon of post-apocalyptic over it, but I didn't feel like that really permeated the book as a whole. I didn't hate it. I just also was not super interested in it. Katie had mentioned that in an interview, the author was saying that it's really 3 books put into one because she didn't get a green light for a second book. And that actually kind of makes a lot of sense in terms of how quickly things move. But, moving quickly does help with plot momentum. So
yes, and specifically, if I remember correctly, I don't remember if it was her or the interviewer, or I believe she also had her not her editor, but a friend or somebody else with her. I believe it was Erin, though, that might have mentioned that she also prefers books that are faster paced. So she specifically chose, if this is the case, a slightly faster pace. She doesn't like a whole bunch of verbose sort of prose. So that might have also been an influential factor.
Okay, so Katie, what did you think of it?
I'm pretty much almost in agreement with Will. I think there's a lot of really nice features that she threw in there, that not threw in there, but like nice pieces of the plot that I thought worked well and were not, I wouldn't say like mind-blowing unique. Like it wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was well utilized and I thought it was nice. If any, oh, you know what? I wonder if she was also inspired. I wonder at what point she started writing this. It's because she could have also been maybe inspired by Horizon Zero Dawn. It's because of the weird twist that happens. If you, Will, you played the game, yes or no?
No, but I know the story.
Yes, you know how the twist, we'll discuss it later. You know the twist that comes about later? It's almost like that, but not quite.
It's reminiscent, yeah.
Yes, it is. And so I enjoyed the book well enough, but I will say, I'm sorry, Erin, but I lost interest once we got essentially out of Bedrock. So I'm sorry. What about you, Maria?
I think I enjoyed it the most out of the three of us. Me and Will have read a lot of really not great books recently.
Which I would like to be a part of. Let's do that next time. I want to read.
There was no way you were going to get through 5 books of Blue Spurs. We're going to do one pretty soon that has been much requested
by our audience.
And I'm actually partaking.
So we'll see how she can get through it and how much alcohol she'll need.
The point is, we've read a lot of not, and especially like even like Wrath and Dawn, which I went into really thinking I would enjoy. I was given options. I was like, ooh, give me a good Scheherazade retelling. And so this book was like, except for a couple of moments, mainly in the last third, I have moments that I call like where the narrative slaps you out of it, where you're like, you're thrown out of the story and you're like, why did that happen? And for the most part, this book didn't have that for me. And so I was able to just, like Katie said, it's not mind-blowing. But for me, I would say, like Will said it was decent. I would say it's like a decent, good book. Like,
yeah,
it's
I
not
agree.
Exceptional. It's not a great book. But it was an easy read to get through. The pace went at a clip. It was really the last third where a lot of my issues, and then because of that last third, I'll say how things could have been fixed in the first third, and then some personal preferences for me as a reader that I'll comment on. And there's definitely like things that could have been fixed, and Katie letting me know that like it was supposed to be 3 books explains a lot of it.
So much.
But for me, it was a relatively enjoyable, painless read. There was only like a couple points that I really went, why? Why'd this happen?
The prose, it actually kept me engaged. That's how decent her prose is that despite the plot fading in interest for me, I still actually read word for word the rest of the book.
See, for me, her prose is really clean, fast-paced, and suits the world a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
One thing that I wanted to, because a lot of the emotional things, the emotional beats that happen in the last third, I almost wanted the writing from Wrath and Dawn.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
If you took the prose and the writing from Wrath and Dawn and took these characters in this plot, I think it would have been, because there's a sense of magic that is missing from the world that Mad Max Fury Road had. It was like the world was like decimated, but there was this beautifulness even in the scenes where like the sand was kind of shiny.
Yeah, it's this weird, it's a beautiful perspective of a ragged world.
Yes, you don't need that. That's something that this book didn't necessarily need, and she might not have wanted. She might have just wanted it to be what she did. But I think a little bit more of that like descriptive, and I don't want to say poetic, but a little bit more of a descriptive narration / prose would have really helped the emotional beats in the last third. Yeah. But overall, I enjoyed it, guys. I'm really, I don't, like, I'm gonna have things that could have been better, but man, what a relief.
She did a good job. She did a good job. And I know she's done Westerns and also sci-fi horror in the past.
Ooh.
Sci-fi horror is a left turn for her. She was interested, she did it. The other ones, she did a Western series, and she loved the Western series so much and the vibe of it that, and I'll get to this later when we're actually talking about it, that's what inspired her mostly for this one.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, right? It has a Western feel, like very Trigun.
The Western and the post-apocalyptic tend to be kind of very similar in terms of the genre conventions and the stories you can tell. But let's go ahead and jump into the plot, and then we can talk about it as we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Start us off, Maria.
Okay, so this book, it starts out with Delta of Dead River. And it starts out like on just a night. She lives off of this place called Dead River because it was a river, but it's dead now. And it's her and her pack. And this is the term that they use for like the group you live with. It's not like tribe or anything like that. They call them their packs. I don't love that as a term, but I got used to it.
Yeah, no, I would have preferred clan or something. Pack made me feel like they were really, really like primitive.
I felt like it wasn't cool because they're not actually predatory like a pack. I think you could do something more elemental and simple in the way that, oh look, we're already talking about Fury Road. The way that Fury Road uses language is very it's used backwards. Like, he's not called Immortal Joe, he's Immortan Joe, and you have the pairing of the very simple name with the...
And we have Mother's Milk, Aqua Cola.
Witness. It's not like witness me, it's just a very simple, blunt instrument of a word. So, like, or competent, I think is... What is it that they call each other when
mediocre,
yeah, exactly. So I could see something like not family, but something very simple and elemental that shows a degradation in the language back to a more simple form.
The other reason why I didn't like pack is because, like, as far as I know, they don't have dogs or like any pack animals on this planet.
Do they know?
How would they have? Anyway, we're getting caught up on something real small, real quick. It's Delta and her pack, and she lives mainly with her sister Indy and her mother. They call like their world the Wastes, and in the Wastes, a lot of times you don't know who your daddy was because the men are traitors going back and forth, and you know, her mom slept, like, her and Indy have two separate papas, but her sister is her older sister Indy. Indy is preggo at the start, and you get like, it's just a night of them hanging out, and then there's a storm coming, and everybody's like hunkering down for this storm, so they're going into this little like underground space. And as they settle down, and she's talking with her sister Indy, and this conversation really works to kind of set up like the culture of the religion as well as Delta's position in it. And so there's this idea that they had gods, the gods abandoned them and left in the stars, but the stars foretell that the gods are going to come back. Everyone will find the verdant, which is akin to Mad Max's Green Place.
Or in Waterworld's Dry Land.
And it's just like the place where there is water and green things, which is very rare. Like, the gods will come back, everything will be fine. It's in the stars, the signs have come together, and Delta is very disillusioned with her religion. Like, she looks at everything and she's like, I don't see how anything is going to change. She doesn't have a really strong connection. And her sister Indy, kind of like, you can tell that Indy's on this like precipice of like being disillusioned but still having way more faith. So like, she'll joke with Delta but then get very serious about it. In the middle of this conversation, Indy's water breaks and the baby is coming, but Indy's not doing well. Like, she's not feeling well.
Did you ever get the feeling that the reason Indy was going through that problem is because the baby had turned and become like, you know, wrapped in the umbilical cord or something? And usually when the babies turn, it's really hard for the mother in labor.
I know a lot about uteruses, and I knew that was a thing, and I agree with you.
Thank you so much. I really feel like your backup really solidifies my argument.
I mean, I didn't, partially just because my umbilical cord, I ended up wrapped around my throat like 3 times, and my mom was fine the whole time. And also because she starts like passing out and like getting headaches, I think. And so like, that's what I'm not exactly sure what was happening to Indy, but immediately everyone realizes this is not a good birth and there's a storm coming. But the only way to save Indy is to take her to Zuli, who is the healer lady. And normally Zuli comes out, but we don't have time. And Delta is immediately like, oh shit, if I have to go to Zuli, this means Indy's probably dying. So she packs up Indy and like drags her, like she's got a little
rickshaw type of thing.
And she goes to Zuli's, and Zuli's lives in this giant tanker in the middle of what once was an ocean. So this thing used to float, and it's the biggest, at this point, the biggest thing Delta's ever seen in her life. Like, her family, they have their little huts, they've got some underground things, but like, that's it. And she hasn't traveled besides when they lived on this place called Alkali Lake, which is in the beginning very like, you're not sure, like, something terrible happened at Alkali Lake, but you're not sure what it is yet. But she gets to Zuli's tanker, and Zuli's like, what do you have to trade? Like, what do you have? And she has something, but it's not a ton. And she ends up she has braids of her hair that they use as
I
rope.
loved that part.
Yeah,
I thought that was stellar.
And I love that she just keeps braids of her hair.
So that way she can trade for rope and also helpful, probably. So
yeah, and it's a really it's one of the interesting little like tidbits that the story, like, rope is so valuable, people will take hair ropes.
I wish there had been more of that in the story.
Yeah.
One of my issues is that the book is not, again, super deep with some of this stuff, and the world building is not as complex and weird as like Fury Road, because we're just going to keep going back to that, guys. Sorry. So I wish there had been more of like that kind of little thing.
I believe Erin also actively mentioned that she is aware that she's not super proud of the world building, but she's like okay with it.
I mean, listen,
that's fair.
I think if it perhaps had been 3 books, there would have been more time to like flesh out some of this stuff. But there is there's that great detail about something that we use that we would never, like, if somebody tried to sell me a rope of hair, I'd be like, that's gross. Why? Get out of here. And so those moments of seeing things that we use one way being used in really interesting ways then. And there wasn't as much of that as there could have been. But again, if she's trying to cram 3 books into one, that might happen. She trades the hair. They take Indy. She has to wait. And then when she wakes up, there's Zuli with the baby. And she's like, is the baby okay? And she's like, Zuli's like, the baby's fine. Here you go. Here's the baby. And she's like, where's Indy? And her sister ends up dying. Very sad for Delta. Not as sad as it could have been had we spent a little bit more time with Indy. I have to say, of all the sisters dying at the start of a book that we have read recently, it was the most emotionally impactful. So, like, I'm thinking of Wrath and Dawn and Iron Widow, where, like, a female character that's very close to the main character, that's basically best friend and or sister, dies.
I actually was really shocked and kind of proud of her for being able to like create that idea in such a short amount of time and such less dialogue. In fact, she was so successful with that relationship. I was very confused why the other relationships were not nearly as impactful. In fact, they're almost like ghosts of what they're supposed to be. But continue.
She now has this baby, and she's like, I don't want the baby. That baby is why my sister died. Keep the baby. And the lady's like, listen, if I keep the baby, this baby's dying. I can't afford to feed another mouth. Like, I've got my own people. And so she's like, I'll give you some stuff though, and you can take this donkey so you can feed her.
No, it wasn't a donkey. It was a sheep. It was a goat.
A goat for the milk. That's what it was. Zuli's like, basically, I'll give you this, but she does say something to her. She said, you know, like, did I ever heal anyone else from your group of people before? And then she's like, well, actually, there was this boy Asher that you healed, and she was like, yes, I remember him. I thought he'd be important and do things. And Zuli's like, what happened to him? And she's like, he's dead. And you're like, she's mentioned this Asher person in memory a couple times, but this is the confirmation that he's dead. And then she looks at her and she's like, you remind me of someone else as well, who I also thought was going to do great things. And then you're kind of left with that, and she takes the baby, and she starts traveling.
We should, at this point, probably introduce Asher, because he doesn't come into the book till later, but it's worth pointing out that at this point, Hare and Asher grew up together, and they both have a plot-relevant brand on their back of a map that their tribe continually goes from person to person. They'll re-inscribe it on the new person's back. She has one and Asher had the other, and they're very careful about not being topless because they don't want anyone else to know that they have it. And supposedly this map leads to the Verdant.
The green place.
Yes, the green place from Fury Road, essentially, where like there is a green land that's not all dust and death, and that whoever gets there first can control the Verdant and who comes in.
But Asher also, since we're doing this, both of the kids had been told, like, never take your shirt off. And then a huge refrain that you hear from Delta is, unless you trust the person with your life, never show them. So Delta is like very much, she never showed anyone. But one day, her and Asher as kids were like, woohoo, and playing around. And Asher took his shirt off, and Delta was like, put your shirt on, Asher. You gotta put your shirt on. And then, while he's like, no, I don't care, I'm going to be young and rebellious, she looks through her binos, She has binoculars, and she sees some men on horseback that are in the distance, and she's like, shit, buddy, put your shirt on. And he eventually does, and they scurry. Eventually, this causes a rift in the pack, because half the pack is like, if those people saw him and saw his brand, they might come back. We need to leave. And the other half is like, the odds of like Delta doesn't even know if they actually saw, like she thinks they might have seen, like there's no guarantee. This is a good place. Why would we leave it? And the pack ends up having a schism. And so Asher and his mom stay with the people at Alkali Lake, and then Delta's portion of the pack moves off to Dead River. And eventually the Alkali Lake pack gets killed and murdered.
Slaughtered?
Yeah, slaughtered. And everybody's like, and so this has made Delta's mother like very like even more cautious than before. So like Delta's like, we need to go to other places, we need to explore, and like this isn't the best place. And her mom's like, nope, this kept us safe once, we shall stay here forever until the gods come. It's a thing that her and her mom often argued about. But anyway, she heads back from Zuli's tanker back to Dead River, and she does not like this baby. This baby cries. It's annoying. She keeps having to change it, and she's just like, she's like, why do we need you? You can't support yourself. You're not helpful. You won't be helpful for years. Like, this is a tough place. God damn it, baby.
Also, it killed her sister.
And it killed her sister.
There's some resentment with that.
She has a lot of resentment towards this baby, but as she travels, she gets a little bit softer.
I loved that.
Yeah.
I loved that. I thought that was I wanted that to continue throughout the whole book.
I did too. I think the baby got separated too quick. I was thinking about that this morning. But anyway, she gets to Dead River, and she notices, and a thought she had earlier was that like she hopes some of the coals from the fires they had, because a storm was coming, wouldn't blow into some of the huts and start a fire. And as she comes up, she sees like burnt, and she's like, did that happen? But as she gets closer, she realizes, no, this was a systematic burning. Everything's been burned to the ground. She ends up finding 3 bodies, 2 of which was a lady and the lady's son that she knew, and their heads are caved in. And then the last is Old Fang, who was like the oldest member of their group, who surprisingly lived into, I don't know, I imagined him like 60s, 70s.
I did too. Maybe 50s, because that might be old in their place, but like I was picturing that as well.
Yeah. And she's like, she realizes Old Fang is still alive, though barely. And he basically tells her that like men came and like burnt everything. They kept bashing people's skulls in, looking for something, and that they took the rest of the pack with them. Does she find out the name? Like, does she find out about Bedrock here? Does he say they were taking, or just that they took them?
I don't believe she knows the name Bedrock for sure. If she does, I don't recall it. But what happens is, I think the direction or whatever, and then she goes off in that direction.
So Old Fang ends up dying as she's holding him and talking to him, and she's left in this like utter desolation, and now she has to go travel beyond, like, so she already had her like there and back again of the farthest she's ever been from her home, and now she has to go even farther, and she ends up like with baby trekking through, and she comes upon, and this very much reminded me of Mad Max, a tower.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a man stuck in the tower. Now by this point she's beginning to get fonder, like the baby like coos softly, and she sings lullabies that her mom sang to the baby. So she's developing a relationship, but she hasn't named the baby. In her head and in her narration, the baby's the baby. That's it. And she finds this tower, and there's a guy like attached up at the top who's like chained, and he's like help me, and she's like, God damn it, you don't trust anyone in the waste, like I should leave him. It's something he says ends up getting to her, and she's like, okay, let me go see what's going on. And she goes up and she looks around all over and doesn't see anything. So she's like, where would someone come from for this to go south? And she's trying to help him, and it's kind of, his face is kind of in shadows, and as she's trying to help him, he suddenly goes, leave, run, go. And she's like, all of a sudden guys from the top of the tower drop in, and she's like, God damn it, I've been tricked. But at this point she looks up at the guy's face and realizes it's Asher, her formerly thought to be dead best friend from her childhood.
What a twist.
What a twist. She's immediately like, fuck you, fuck the horse you rode in on, god damn it. And then so she ends up waking up with her and or the baby in a wagon that's like
It's a prison wagon.
It's a prison wagon, but it's still like the heat's getting to them. Asher is on a horse next to them or walking next to them, and then the two other guys are at the front of the wagon. And she's like, how long did you know it was me, motherfucker? And he was like, right before, like, I saw the scar in your eyebrow that I gave you as young chillins, and I was like, oh shit, sorry. And she's like, how could you do this? And they're arguing, and then he comments on the baby, and he's like, is that yours? And she's like, no, it's Indy's. And he was like, where's Indy? And she's like, Indy is dead.
I also thought, like, this was also a really good scene. We already knew the world was super harsh with Zuli's place and then also the massacre. But then this really solidifies it because these two dudes that have hired Asher or whatever, we'll talk about it later. They're like, oh, great, slaves. Let's grab the young woman. It's because she's fresh and healthy. And let's grab the baby. Yay! Good money.
Great money.
And so one thing is that the book will try to insist a lot from this point forwards that Delta doesn't know how much she can trust Asher, that he's like a different person than she knew. But for me, this never really worked because it feels way too safe. I never really got a sense that, like, Asher had really changed. It's one of the things I talked about liking in Axiom's End and Truth of the Divine is that Ampersand in those books, and, you know, he's a deer antelope velociraptor, so it's a little different, but he really does feel weird and strange, and like you really don't know what's going on with him, and there's that edge to him. Asher never had that edge. It's always very clear that, like, oh, he's a good guy who did like some not terrible things but not great things for a while. And that's one of the things that I find is a bit of a problem in this book, is that, and why I say that the post-apocalyptic setting is really just the Dorito dust on a normal YA book, is that the characters don't embody the atmosphere and themes of the setting. So post-apocalyptic settings always have like a sense of decay and entropy and primitivism to them and built-in sort of environmental critiques. And I'm not saying this book has to be The Road, Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is insanely desolate and is about like the destruction of everything. But like you never really get a sense that like Asher had to make hard decisions and it just feels very safe to me. I never really get a sense through him or any of the characters really that they actually live in a desperate dying world. Delta is way too practical all the time. In general, this is a thing I said to Maria, but like I'm so tired of YA protagonists like this. And she was like, what was you said that it was that
the capable altruistic kind of
altruistic but headstrong characters are just
it was
I agree with you, Will, but I don't totally agree with you because I think she really like overwhelmingly hits the nail on the head when it comes to how much they have to adapt to the environment. It's like that is a obsession is water, and that we really get that throughout the whole novel. I think she did a good job with that. But I would agree the characters, there's something about them, all of them, even Delta to some degree sometimes, they seem like archetypes rather than true feeling, acting, thinking characters. I never really felt a connection with any other character. For a brief moment, I did with a character we're about to explore that's going to be introduced. His name is, what's the dude with the falcon's name?
Reed.
I
liked Reed.
In the beginning, I liked Reed. I thought Reed was an interesting character. And then, not so much. A lot of the characters feel more like tools rather than true characters.
Yeah, we were pretty solid. I said, first person is a really bad way to make a main character feel unique. I stand by that statement, and I will explain it. Especially when most main characters are headstrong, brash, but capable.
Yes, and that combination is just super boring at this point for me.
Just because it's been played.
It's been played. It feels like an author insert. Like it feels like, oh, the author wants the more cool version of themselves instead of a character in their own right. Which sometimes when authors push themselves, again, I'm going to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm sorry, guys. Those are my favorite books in the world.
Take a shot.
Yes. So in that one, like he has such a wide variety of characters. And some of the characters he doesn't like as much feel more distinct and interesting because they are their own people in their own right. And sometimes with these books, it feels very restrained and safe. And the other thing is that a lot of times I find that these books don't have a strong characterizing scene.
Yeah.
This is a thing I learned in writing, which is that when you have a character, you want to, in their first scene or almost first scene, define who they are through action and the setting. So if you have a really competent character, don't say they're competent, have them do something competent. And that sounds very basic, But that actually, like, Delta doesn't do anything in the first couple chapters that's, like, really defines her as a character. That's the thing. Characters are defined by action, and so you want to have a very strong action that the character takes early on. I'm kind of a writing genius.
Well, yeah, actually he is. But then so are we all, I feel, as
No,
though.
just me.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, just Will. I felt like she had some, like, there were specific moments where I felt like Erin did a good job characterizing, such as, like, well, first of all, the braid hair one. I really liked the scenes where Delta did something succinct and almost like without, like, very laconically made an action, did it. And it felt like almost like it made her a stern, angry, jagged character. And especially with the baby stuff, it really helped that. And it brought out a side of her with the softening. And I thought the baby could have been used so much better.
The baby could have really helped Delta's character, because for the most part, Delta makes there's a couple choices Delta makes where she makes like the wrong choice. One, which I will die on the cross of, I just don't like it. And for the most part, the novel will acknowledge when Delta makes a wrong choice, though not as much as it should have been in the case that I will die on the cross of.
Is it the hawk scene? Yeah, I know. I felt the same way. That was a weirdly violent scene. We'll get to it later.
We'll get there, guys.
Okay, continue.
Again, a lot of characterization happens with the baby, and I agree with Katie. There were moments that gave me this kind of, so not just headstrong and brash and capable vibe from her, but also like harsh.
Yeah.
There was moments of that harshness, and I think that could have differentiated her more from other. There was always too much of like, and I don't want to say like a morally good side, because again, Delta makes bad decisions. I would say she's not. There was always just something that kept her from being as harsh as she could have been, and I liked that. And I like the idea of her starting that way and then softening with the baby.
Yeah, that would have been so nice.
A huge theme in this is not just survival, but living, which is something that a lot of post-apocalyptic things, like, that's at their core of them, surviving as a almost animalistic way of living, which you really see in Mad Max. I mean, I think Fury Road is defined by survival is so intense that like everything kind of comes down.
It's high octane the whole time.
But also everything is like, the way you communicate is in very short, specific, like there's codes for everything, so there's no poetic language, there's no metaphor, it's just
except for from Immortan Joe,
yes,
who is a speaker.
Yes.
So,
and I think having that harshness to Delta, and then having her, I wanted to feel Delta go from a survivalist more to someone who wanted to live. And that
I'm gonna do something that will please you immensely, and that is talk about your favorite book. So, in Spinning Silver, there is a character who kind of slowly unthaws over time in terms of her relationship with her brothers. I am blanking on her name. She's the big peasant.
Irina,
the one with the
Miriam,
freckles.
and oh my god,
I thought this was your favorite book.
It
Oh,
is,
wow.
it
Yeah,
is. Oh my
what
god,
the heck,
I'm blanking.
Maria? You're not even representing.
Anyway, in that book, her arc is kind of starts in a very like, I just want to get through this. I'm all about myself.
Why do I remember Stepan's name?
Because he's a dumb character. Slowly, she kind of unthaws and starts to trust her brothers more and expand her compassion, essentially, for who she has compassion
Wanda.
for.
Her name is Wanda.
Wanda. I think that's a more interesting arc than the one Delta goes through, which feels very tired and played out. And I think unthawing is a more unique one.
And I would agree. And going from the hardened to a more soft, especially because the point of the book is going from survival to actually living.
Also, what a missed opportunity as well to form a bond with her sister, but through her sister's kin.
Yeah, we continually want better female relationships in these books and are continually denied it.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It should be.
And from female authors, too, is the funny part. Like Wrath in the Dawn, this book, Iron
Maybe
Widow.
everybody has mommy issues.
But delving into mommy issues is really interesting.
Okay,
not
fine,
And
fine.
it's not to say that this book doesn't have female relationships. It's just none get as deep as the relationships that she has with, like, Asher, who is a male character. Now, granted, one of the big tropes of YA novels is not necessarily female-female friendships, it's romance. I think part of it is, and I don't want to say this because I've read YA that does these things anyway, but I think, like, not only is this a YA book, but it's also shoving, like, perhaps there would have been more time spent with Indy. Perhaps Harley would have had a more fleshed out role as a mother slash
We haven't
grandmother figure.
discussed her yet.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just like throwing out
No,
female
I'm just letting our
relationships. Yeah.
viewers know, or listeners.
And then there's a character named the Prime that I think could have had, no, it's not her name, but she gets called the Prime, that I think would have had a really cool, and if it was spread out over 3 books, because this has 3 arcs. This book has 3 distinct things that could have been their own books, and I see it, and I see how if they had been their own books, I think these 3 female characters, Indy, the Prime, and Harley,
that's right. That would be
would
great.
have been defining relationships in each of these 3 books. So again, while we're making these like notes, a lot of this might just be an author had a story and needed to get condensed, and so things had to go. And it's a YA, so you gotta have the romance. So Asher didn't go as much as maybe some of the other relationships did. She's in the wagon, she's been captured, and they end up getting to this place called the Barrel. And it is like village slash stopping point that is in between like a rock formation. So it's literally
it's like a crag.
There's one way in and one way out, so they call it the Barrel. They get there and they're gonna sell her. And as she's been going, she's been talking to Asher, rekindling a little bit of their relationship, but she still doesn't really trust him. And then at a certain point, he's like, listen, I'm going to help you. And I need you to, like, trust me. They're going to sell you. They're going to sell you to someplace there. And then once you're there, you'll have a way easier time of escaping. And I can still get out of this thing that I'm with these guys. I will go to this bar every day at noon. And once you're gone, we'll get the hell out of Dodge. And she's like, okay. But then when she's getting sold, they're going to separate her. And at this point, because Asher's like, what's the baby's name? And she's like, Bay. And at first I thought it was just because it was the first part of baby, but it's Bay as in B-A-Y.
And that's why. It's because she literally couldn't bother herself to think of a better name for her freaking sister's daughter.
And the entire time, I know it wasn't, but I kept thinking it was B-A-E.
Yeah.
Like, what's up, Bay?
Me too,
which,
initially.
Made it much more comedic.
And then eventually there's a nice connection, because I didn't realize initially, but a lot of people's names were either like water formations.
Yeah, metals. So that worked out. That's interesting.
Yeah, and there's a part where she literally says the delta always leads to the bay. And so like she was always going to come back to her because they end up getting separate. So it's pretty, and eventually there's like it works. But anyway, and they're gonna, some lady is gonna buy Bay but isn't gonna buy her, and she's like, absolutely fucking not. You're not separating me, because at this point she's like, this is the last hold I have to my pack and my sister who is dead. You are not taking this baby from me. So she ends up like punching a guy, and she's running. She's got the baby. They're going, but then at the last minute, one of the guys who were with Asher knocks her over the head, and they end up going to whip her, and they take her shirt off. And as they take her shirt off, they see her brand, and it's like, oh shit. And so this guy with a ram skull mask and a hawk is like, I need to take her to Bedrock. And they were like, but she's our slave. And he was like, you want to get in the way of the general? And this is the first time we hear talk of the general. And they're like, no, we don't want any trouble with the general. Take her. And so they take her, like, she ends up getting to take the baby. And it turns out the baby was going to Bedrock anyway. She gets in the wagon going to Bedrock. And as she's about to go, Asher runs up and is like, don't drink the water. And she's like, what? And he was like, don't drink the water. And then they fuck off. She goes to Bedrock. Bedrock is this place run by the general. It is getting water from a waterfall behind a dam.
I almost pictured that, except for obviously in a wider span. The one scene where Immortan Joe runs through all their greenery that they're growing and goes to, you know, the safe with all the women. That's what I was picturing, but except for in a garden setting.
Yeah, and it is exactly the same place as Immortan Joe's like hangout, essentially.
Yeah, it's very similar, but not quite. It's more like
not quite, you're
fort.
Right, yeah.
It's like a fort. Too,
yeah,
a little bit.
They
in the story though, it's like very reminiscent of
it's the same run. Yeah, it's the same.
It serves the same purpose. The general lives here. He's got water. He controls the supplies. He lives in like the rocks up against the dam, and then against the valley of it is where all the garden is, and there's workers. And when she gets there, he's like, the general's like, yo, you have this map. I want to get to the Verdant. I think your map goes to the Verdant. And she's like, you killed my pack. And he's like, no, they're all here. They chose to be here. And she's like, what do you mean? And he was like, see, look at the greenery. It's a great place. I got water. I got greenery. People choose to be here, Delta. You can choose to be here. And they immediately offer her like water. And she's like, does a fake drink, throws it out kind of thing. Eventually, because like I thought the general was going to really push the narrative of this is a good place. This is a good place. But very, like, by the end of the conversation, he was like, yeah, their choice was die or work my fields.
I know. It was such a character switch. Plus, he almost never comes up ever again. He's only talked about, and he's a force in the background, and he's a very dangerous force, but we almost never get him again. And he just seems like a crazy one-dimensional
He seemed
character.
weak to me. Like, he doesn't have a lot of gravitas. Not in the way Immortan Joe does, or like some other villains where it's like, oh wow, we're all scared of him. It's just kind of like he seemed very
I wanted
bland.
him to be like the Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Or if you've ever played any of the Far Cry games, they always have some crazy prophet villain at the end. It's like kind of an overused thing in those games, but like something like that where it's like this madman with the gravitas and like that I thought would be cool.
I was picturing like Maria Waterworld, the captain of the tanker. I think his name is Deacon. He is a sweet talker. He is like a politician. And I was expecting, if not that, like if that's the way they were going to play it at the beginning and he was going to sweet talk, like it's just, it made no sense to me.
He's playing a hand and then he switches to a completely different hand very quickly because he's trying to like coax Delta, like, you can stay in this room, look, we have all this nice stuff. And I thought it would have been really interesting if she stayed there with Bae, if they showed her that Bae was being taken care of, and look at these kids. And I also, again, I wanted him to be more like Baron Harkonnen. Those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, the Baron Harkonnen is the main villain in Dune, and more not movie Dune, but the actual book. We're in the book. He's just a strategist and incredibly smart. He is so smart. Like, as a villain, I can see, because like I loved Duke Atreides, but I can see why the Baron would outsmart him, and I wanted them to like, I wanted that plot line to be so much longer.
Yeah, in the movie, he's more of an eldritch fat man. But in the movie, he has a different kind of gravitas to him that I think either version would have worked here, where it's like there's a strength to it. And the general I never really got that sense from him.
The hand gets switched too quick. Like, he's originally coaxing and trying to be charismatic and like, but I'm trying to build a better world, Delta. And then very quickly, like, I'm building a better world at the expense of everybody else around me. And it could have been interesting, and it might have been. Mayhaps there was an extended scene where she was at Bedrock. Like, it wasn't bad, and he was genuinely, I don't know. I can't see why that would be set up. And then
there are 3 big acts in this book, and there's this one, another one in a place called Powder Town, and then a part after that. And now that Kitty has said it, it seems like this would have been a whole book with her in this place.
So good. And I'm so frustrated for her.
Drinking her pee the whole time.
Yeah, because what she does is she ends up creating an inverted well.
With her pee.
Like, really, what is his motivation? So, for example, the smoker group, he wanted to bring all those people. He wanted to be a leader. He disrespected them and didn't think they were that smart, but he had a close group. And so did Immortan Joe, right? He had his family. He wanted to reproduce. He wanted to create a dynasty.
There's a lack of conviction to the general,
yes,
I think.
What is his purpose? If he just has mindless slaves, like, who's going to benefit besides him?
And it also has this weird thing where, like, he is very into the religion and the idea of the God's touch. So when they were bashing skulls in earlier, it's because if you're the God's touched, you have something, you have a star in your brain, and he wears a necklace of stars, like these little things that they call stars, that have, you think, been taken out of people's heads. And as a reader, I was like, what the heck is that? Where they
That's a really cool feature.
I thought initially it was just a necklace he found, and he claimed that they came out of people's heads. Because it was this really interesting, like, that's a weird concept. Why are we bashing people's skulls then?
I love that concept.
Great.
That was unique.
Something like, and I don't think this works in terms of the world building, but an example of his showing his fanaticism is like, maybe he had a kid that he thought, he had a daughter or something that he loved that he thought might have that in her head, so he bashed her head in. It's a little bit cliche, but that would show the strength of his conviction
like,
in this cause.
And like this religious fervor, because he's painted almost like a Frollo.
Yes.
That would have been a great character for them, because again,
wouldn't it?
You have the, and because like Frollo's not actually like a priest or anything. He is in the original. But anyway, he's not actually a priest. He's just in charge of Paris, like the defense of Paris, and
Paris.
So
that's before Emily got there.
It is Emily in Paris. It's don't worry about it. If you don't know, leave it at that.
Instead of like fighting for like people, which she didn't obviously really want to do with him, What if he literally wanted to meet the gods?
Yep.
And that's why he wanted to get to Eden. And that's why he didn't care about smashing people's skulls open. That would have been cool.
That would.
Yeah, he needed to be more unhinged.
He needed a better, because like his motivation is he wants to find the verdant, and what you find out, and I'm fine getting to this a little bit quicker, that this bedrock, this place that functions kind of like an Eden, the water coming through the waterfall is getting less and less each year. They're running out of water, and this is why he's really pushing to find the verdant, because at first Delta's like, you don't need the verdant, you have this, why are you pushing for this? Find out it's because the water's running out, and he's like,
I forgot about that.
But
That's
again,
true.
like if he just cared about himself, you could, this water will last your lifetime, buddy.
Why does he need so much food if he doesn't care about the people?
And that's the thing, is there's this weird disconnect between the size of his operation and his actual, and again, having that religious fervor and being like, I will become a god by finding the verdant.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of thing would have been really...
Or maybe, like, he thinks he's a god already and he's just missing his powers and he's gonna go ascend to them or something like that. And, like, again, that would play more into the tropes and themes of the post-apocalyptic descent into primitivism and madness kind of a thing. One thing we should mention is that he has a bunch of workers, and what happens is that she finds out that the reason you're not supposed to drink the water there, that Asher told her, is because it has a drug that sort of makes them very compliant and docile.
He basically tells her, you help me read the map, or I'm going to kill your pack one by one, starting with your fucking mother. And so she ends up realizing that her family's drugged up, they barely remember anything, they just work and they want this water, and she's like, that's weird, I'm not gonna do that. She ends up meeting the Oracle, who is just a woman who can read. That's it. And he thinks she's going to be able to read, so she looks at his map, and he makes like a metal like thing of the map, because they lost their last map. That was Asher. Because you realize Asher had mentioned he'd been taken by Bedrock and it was really shit and he escaped. And so Asher was the last map. And the Oracle's like, I don't understand your map. And she's like, I don't understand my map. And he's like, I killed your mother because you are pretending you don't understand the map. And they literally, like, they take her up to like the top, slit her throat. Super shitty for her, but you don't have as much of an emotional impact. This was something Katie was mentioning, because her relationship with her mother was not super well established compared to her and Indy. So like, I was just like, oh shit, we killed the mom immediately. Like, there was no like
reconciliation, nothing.
I thought it was gonna just last longer as a threat, and then he was like, every day at noon, if you don't give me the map,
every 3 days, every 3 days,
I'll just kill another one of your pack, going from oldest to youngest. And she ends up escaping, and how she does it is there's a group of people, traders, who come in, and she's like, help me. And the lady's like, I'm sorry, the only way out is through the dead. With the dead. Throughout this whole time, the guy who brought her in, this guy named Reed, he's one of the general. The general has 4 really close people that he trusts, and they all have ram skulls and they all have falcons. And Reed keeps lightly helping Delta. He finds her inverted well and realizes she's not drinking the water, and he doesn't say anything. And then one night when gets kicked out of the nice rooms and she's in like the shitty huts with the rest of the workers, he comes and he's gonna say something after her mom dies. She like jumps down his throat and he ends up not saying it. And then, but you get the sense that he was coming there to help her, kind of thing. And
he also gave her fresh water.
Yes, he does give her that night. He gives her fresh water, and then she yells at him. And then he's like, well, screw you. And then she's like, wait, what were you going to say? And he was like, I'm sorry about your mom. And then he goes off. And then she has a brain blast because she saw them carting a dead body, like her mom's body, to a specific place. And I forgot how she found out, but somebody mentioned that the dead bodies, she overhears Reed talking to people that the dead bodies are going to get carted out because they don't burn them in Bedrock. They burn them out of Bedrock. And she's like, brain blast, I shall hide with the dead bodies. She hides with the dead bodies. She ends up escaping. She ends up getting back to the barrel. When she's at the barrel, she goes to that bar, and Asher does happen to come. They end up having like a mad chase because everybody realizes she's run off. She's pretending to be one of the loyalists at this point.
Which is the name for the people who support the general.
The loyalist army is a bunch of men who are not drugged up because they get water and they get to survive. And there's this huge arc that happens. In the beginning, her sister got pregnant and she was like, that was dumb, especially with Clay, because Clay is just the dumb traitor and like he's not very bright and why would you do that? And then she was like, at least when I rolled in the hay with a traitor, it was Flynn and he's kind of smart. She ends up finding out that Flynn is one of
Lo and behold, Flynn's the reason her whole pack got annihilated.
He ended up joining the Loyalists because, again, men in the Waste, you're either a traitor or they ended up just getting sucked into the Loyalist army because you don't have to worry about, like, surviving anymore. They take care of the survival aspect. So it's really compelling to people. And he didn't realize what would happen when he gave this information.
I also, like, granted, he's fine as is, but I felt like we should have, like, he seems like a plot device more than a betrayal moment.
I think it was mainly to show that she's not as good a judge of character as she thought, because she thought Flynn was cool and Clay sucked.
That's fair.
But Clay ends up being she ends up meeting him at a later point, and we'll get there. Because she really judges her sister for sleeping with Clay, and she's like, at least I slept with a smart traitor. And like, nah, bitch. He's the reason you're here. And he didn't know what was going to happen when he gave this information, but it still wasn't a positive move.
I just feel like she mentions him so much in her inner thoughts that he felt like a really important character. And then when he just is like, yeah, I betrayed you, peace.
I think more could have been done, but it didn't need to be done.
Yeah.
Kind of like
no, it didn't.
Everything in this book, it's decent, but not exceptional.
Her and Asher escape. They end up, as they escape from the barrel, and they're trying to get to Powder Town, which is a, like, neutral, it's the only free city in the Waste. He ends up confessing that how he got out was the previous Oracle. So the Oracle Shemet's dad helped him escape through the sewage system. So she went out with a bunch of dead corpses, and also finds out the one she was laying on was her mom. That was the most impactful moment of her, like, relationship, way more than her mom's death. The fact that because she literally wretches. And she kills a man, and it's the first time she's ever killed someone, and she actually has a violent like, she throws up, she feels really, like, shitty. Eventually she's like, I had to do it, but, like, damn.
That was a really good character building moment too, because it made her harsher. That's when she gets harsher again, and slowly but surely she gets harsher and harsher and harsher, and then it pops later.
And she becomes really single-minded. But anyway, so they escape, and he, like, confesses, and she realizes, wow, his life was really shitty. He has tons of scars on his front, which she ends up discovering because they didn't whip him and fuck with him on the back, and he was drugged up on the ilk a lot. So they bond, they're getting closer. She realizes his life has been significantly harder and shittier than hers was. Sympathy. They end up getting to Powder Town. They realize at some point someone's following them, but they get to Powder Town, and there's a bunch of, like, loyalists coming after them. They end up getting in, and you find out that Asher had previously been in Powder Town, but one of the rules, like, if you get to Powder Town and you agree to work for Powder Town, you're not supposed to leave and abandon Powder Town. It's like, you've joined the family.
It's indentured servitude.
I didn't really see it like that. It was like...
It's community-based. They're trying to build a community. No, I know. I also viewed it that way. But I thought it was really weirdly, like, unflexible, which I guess makes sense in this world. But considering they wouldn't even, like, parlay or something, like, that just, it seems so...
It's interesting because, again, with a lot of this book, I would have preferred it had been a little bit more unhinged and fanatical, where maybe this is, like, more of a communist cult almost. Of, like,
oh yeah,
we all have to work, we all have to be together, maybe because it's painted as like, oh, this is the best place to live, this is basically the modern world, we have an enlightened leader that I don't know if she's democratically elected or not, but, like, I would have liked if, like, okay, this place does have good things about it, but it's also kind of crazy and a little bit out there. I would have liked the dial to just be turned up a little bit on their culture. And what we find out about Powder Town as well is that they supply the general with the black powder for his guns to make them work. And so they have sort of a parasitic relationship in a way. They don't like him, but they need him to survive. And there's actually kind of a fascinating thing that I thought could have been played with more. Going off topic a little bit, but I'll come back over, don't worry. Norway, I think, or one of those Icelandic countries, has a lot of access to gas, and that's one of the reasons it's so rich. But they are always pushing in their own country for green energy. And so they're one of the most green energy states, but they're using the profits from selling gas to get to that point. And so I kind of think it would be more interesting if Powder Town kind of was more of that kind of a parasitic, like, sure, they live good, but only at the expense of trading to people who aren't as good. I thought that would be kind of an interesting idea to play with more and emphasize.
Yeah, it's the same thing as Bedrock, but in a more facade fashion of how intense it or how controlling it is.
Again, just turn the dial up a little.
I also had that where if it was a little more fanatical, because like there are parts of it where you're like, wait, why aren't people? And the idea is you can go out of Powder Town, but the idea is you're supposed to want to come back. And so like Asher previously went to Powder Town and was like, yes, I commit to Powder Town, and then was like, fuck you, I'm leaving once he was healed up to find his pack with no plans of coming back at that time, which, you know, for them is abandonment. And initially someone recognizes him and was like, fuck you, Asher, we're not letting you in. And then he says the code to get in, and then he was like, Delta, say it. And they get in, and basically in Powder Town, they're like, we'll take you in, but the Prime's also like, let me hear your story. Asher, why the fuck are you back? Like, they remember him. They're like, you're now living in Powder Town. What branch do you want to be a part of? Asher's already part of production. And she's like, I guess I'll be part of production, because at this point, Delta's goal is she can't read the map. She needs to find someone who does so she can save her family. And she thinks Powder Town is her best bet to find someone. And she's like, the best person would probably be the chemist, because the chemist might be able to read the recipe for the black powder. So I'm going to try get to her. So she says production. She ends up in the sulfur pond spring. Like she's just picking up.
She's collecting sulfur.
The one you don't want to be is the saltpeter beds, because you're dealing with poop a lot. That's where Asher is.
You said that with such glee for some reason. That's where he is.
It's so funny. Like, it's just, he's like, because she was like, what's saltpeter? And he's like, it's really terrible. And then you find out he works there.
Well, what's funny is at first, the first day he's working with her, and then later the Prime, when she figures this out, the smart one, she's like, no, go work with the poop. You don't get to, just because you were there doesn't mean you left. You have to restart now.
Go to the poop. And it's pretty funny. But you find out he also almost had so there's not a lot of men in Powder Town. So when Asher first came, they set him up. They were like, you get to sleep in the same bed as this lady. Saf.
Reproduce.
You know, go. And Saf didn't like him initially, but then warmed up to him, and then he left. So Saf was kind of pissed, but then decides to forgive him. And everybody's kind of like, but isn't Delta going to end up with him?
It's like a very weak love triangle.
It really isn't, because you know the entire time that he's not actually interested.
More like a love foil.
And for Delta, it's like, look what he could have. Because Delta is really like, I'm about survival, fuck love, ain't nobody got time for that shit. Like, she knows Asher's into her, and she knows she's into Asher, but she's like, I'm just not gonna touch it. Because everybody's like, listen, if you don't want him to end up with someone else, you should say something. And she's like, I ain't saying shit. And even when she gets upset because she knows she hasn't said anything, she's like, I haven't said anything, so, you know, it's fine.
And she seemed like a really interesting character. I thought she was going to have more of a role to play.
She probably does if it was a book. Because again, I think this Powder Town is book too.
Is its own, should have been its own thing. Eventually, she realizes the chemist knows nothing, but then her and Asher have a moment where she sees Asher's back. Like, he's dirty, she's dirty, they're washing up, and she sees his back, and she realizes, holy shit, his isn't the same as mine. And then she, like, draws his, and then she was like, you draw mine in this dirt on top of this one. And when they're laid on top of each other, they make a complete map. So what her pack had completely forgotten was that it wasn't one map put twice on two different people. It was one map divided and put on two different people, so you had to have both to be able to read it.
One thing I really liked that she addressed, at some point while they're drawing the map, they discuss distances, and they're like, wait, the distances between these places on the map don't really line up to the proper distances that we do know. And then she's like, well, of course not. As people get older, their back like the skin stretches out, so of course it's not going to be the same. And I was like, thank God, it's because I was thinking the same thing.
But also, it might have just been a map of location and not like the map might never have been super accurate. But anyway, so she's like, this is it. I know where the verdant is. And she knows the letter E. It's the only letter she knows because the Oracle told her. And it's an E, what is described, and you realize it's an N, an E, and then, or a D, an E, a D, an E, and an N. And she can't read it. And she was like, I don't know what that word is, but you're like, ooh, Eden. This is the map to the verdant. And so at this point, I'm like, it's Waterworld. It's Waterworld. There's a map. It's on skin. They're going to go find it. It's Waterworld. And I remember because I was talking to Will and he was a little bit farther ahead and he was like, no, I veered back into Mad Max territory. And I was like,
I don't think so. If anything, remember in Waterworld how they use the balloon ship? Like, it's like a hot air balloon. They use like a hot air balloon. And in this one, they use sails. on like a dead car, so it's almost the same.
What I think has the Mad Max thing is it's not another place. You have to go back to where you were from and make it better.
Yes.
That
yes.
vibe is. So she's like, I know where to go now. I don't need to be here anymore. I'm leaving. And he's like, no, let's not leave. Let's just stay here. We're safe. I found you. We're safe. Let's not go. And she's like, fine, I'm going without you, poop head.
What are we, 9? Poop head?
I don't know. Their fight scenes always were a little like,
they were so lame.
Like, come on, guys.
Catty. They were catty.
Like, but also I would have been like, yo, Prime, I know where I would have handled things differently because I'm me.
She does not make very good strategic choices. That's one thing I kept thinking. I'm like, wow, she's a little dumb. But then that also fits in with the idea of her primitive state.
Yeah.
So.
And anyway, so she's like, no, I'm going. And he was like, also, that could desert, because the area where the verdant, what they think is the verdant is like in the middle of a desert. And he was like, you don't know how long that is. You don't know if you have enough rations. It could be like 3 weeks of walking. You could die. Why are we going to do this? And I'm like, well, you take this information to the Prime, and you're like, I'm the only one who knows the map, so you're going to have to fucking trust me. But anyway, that's not what she does. She escapes. She gets out on her own. They realize she escapes, and they just throw Asher out as well. And she's like, why? Asher wanted to stay. And the Prime was like, you told me he was only going to stay if you were here, and now you're gone, so, toodaloo. And Asher is pissed. He got back. He was ready to settle down, live a life, be peaceful. He's super mad at her. And he was like, I'm going my own way. And she's like, I have all the water and shit. And he was like, screw you. She's like, she starts trekking on her way. And then eventually Asher comes back because, you know, he literally has no supplies. And like, laws of the waste, you go with the water. So he comes back. They end up finding this place called they found this old woman in like a collection of ramshackle huts that are more ramshackle than usual. Her name is Harley. All of her pack left and went to Powdertown years ago, but she thinks there's something beyond the desert, and she's been building a wind wagon. Her family, she suspects, used to be sailors. And so she has taken an old truck that she has rigged up with sails, and she's gotten it moving. Her problem is she can't get it to stop. And Delta's like, this is how we get through the desert, and we find the verdant.
And then she solved it in 24 hours. The problem this woman has been working on for years.
Again, this is, I think, one of those things where, because at this point, like, there was the Powdertown book, and then I think Harley's Hope Till the End would have been, like, book 3. And so I definitely think Harley's Hope would have been a longer period. And again, would have developed, because Harley's like this funny, like, but like capable old lady, and I liked Harley. I wish there was more of her. But anyway, so Harley has figured out all the things that don't work, and eventually what Asher makes a point that like Delta's really good fixing things, and she's really good, and that was something that we just don't see a lot of.
No, not at all. I've never seen her fix almost any. The only thing I could remember is at the beginning when she's fixing her goggles, and that's it.
I genuinely thought I had missed the part earlier. I was like, oh, did they mention before that she's good at stuff? I must not be paying attention as much as I thought.
It gets mentioned, but we don't see it.
Yeah, so it becomes almost left field at that point, because you're like, oh, wait a second, what?
And again, that might have been something that she was planning to have happen a lot more. Like maybe when she was in Powdertown, she would have worked like fixing things. I don't know. We don't get it. Brakes. That's what they were trying to get. It was brakes, like how to stop the wheels, because like Harley had tried anchor, nearly toppled it over. She tried some other things. It wasn't working. Delta figures out brakes. She draws it in the dirt. Harley is like, God damn, I'm so bad. You did it in like a day, and I've been thinking about it for years.
Despite the fact that apparently my family were all sailors, and I've been like, I'm not a dumb woman.
In sailing, you wouldn't have had any
I know.
Well, and the way that Delta explains it is like, you worked out all the things that didn't work, so I knew where to start.
Yeah,
like,
that's also fair. Yeah,
there are times where people will bring in consultants to look at something, and the consultant fixes the problem because sometimes you're just too close to it. So that is it. I just wish it would have taken more than a day.
Or, more of her exploring the machine. I really, what it really would have been cool is if it was discussed that the traders would bring her pieces of things, and she would try to create old world tech, as they call it, and try to mimic it. And that would have been pretty interesting. Also, I would like to mention something that not any of us have remembered about because of how not useful it is. Do you remember a special little device that she has.
Oh, the
Lodestone.
Yes.
lodestone.
The lodestone. She has a
compass.
very special device that's pretty magical in comparison to most. It's supposed to tell you directions. It's a compass.
Oh, that's how they got through the
Yes.
geysers.
At some point, they go through geysers on the way to Powdertown. We kind of skipped over that. But the point is it's supposed to, she's like, I have to keep it hidden. Somebody's going to steal it from me. But then we never even have that kind of interaction. So it kind of seems like,
so
whatever.
The idea is that her lodestone is an incredibly because like it's hard to direct yourself through the waste because there are what are called silent storms, and normal compasses do not work in silent storms. But her lodestone leads her true anytime, no matter what, she can get someplace. So it's incredibly, just in this world, I don't need anyone to tell me that this would be a really valuable thing. So her keeping it hidden, I didn't really guess at. There's another thing that I guess I should have mentioned earlier. You get how she got this lodestone was a trader. She's playing as a kid, or like, no, she's trapping game. Like she'd killed some stuff and she's trapping a rabbit. And this guy just pops out and he's like, yo, hi. And she's like, who are you? And he was like, hi, Delta. I'd like to give you this thing. It's going to be important. And he says something about the gods, like, needing her to have this.
It's foretold that she will be special.
And that, like, the gods tell her she needs to have this. Keep it hidden. Keep it safe. And he was like, I'm going to fuck off now. And she was like, that was a weird interaction that I chose not to tell anyone about ever. And so nobody knows she has it. But anyway, back to this. They develop the brakes. It comes together. While this is happening, a falcon is in the sky. And she's like, I know that falcon. It's Reed's falcon. And Reed is the guy who was in Bedrock, who tried to help her, who expressed sympathy to her, who hid some stuff on her behalf. And I've been interested in Reed this whole time and waiting for him to come back. Originally, I thought he was going to be like a second love interest.
I did too.
We were gonna go, yeah.
I wish it had to some degree because that would have been a fun Star Wars moment.
That's what I told Maria.
That's actually pretty funny, but I'm happier with the route it went just because I don't love triangles. So
I don't either.
So I was happy with it.
We all hate them.
She knows Reed is coming. She's like, he's spying. And so she gets Asher, who's really good with a slingshot, to take the bird down, and it comes down and she grabs it and Reed's like, no, my baby. And Reed has like such violent reactions to this bird being at all hurt that it just like,
he loves it.
He really loves his bird. And he was like, no, I'm trying to help you. Like, please just let me speak. So she's like threatening him with the bird, and so I'm going to talk about like my visceral emotional reaction and then from a practical standpoint. So like, she ends up killing his bird before he can explain what he's doing here and why there's no one else with him. Because immediately I'm like, that's odd. Why is he? And now she looks at the bird as a way for him to send a message, but she's also bitter because he works for the general. I think he was there, or he was one of the people that killed her mom. And so she's really bitter, and she like ends up killing the bird. And it slapped me so hard out of the narrative because I was like, what? You have shown at no other point that you would be this kind of like hard, like there's obvious, and also you have shown yourself to be incredibly practical this whole time. Why would you ruin the thing he obviously cares about that you could use to control him?
Yeah, it just, you know what?
I hated it.
I that was the worst scene in the entire book for me. So, and not just because an animal dies, that in and of itself sucks. I liked, they could have played it, she could have played it to be a really harsh moment and almost like a character flaw moment, which it is in its own sense. But they're across from Reed. Reed's there. Reed's explaining, okay, so we send messages with the bird and we use tiles to indicate location and all this stuff. So it's understandable that she was worried about that. And the bird's wing was broken. It couldn't even fly anyway. So, and then she's like, she's confirming with him something. And then she's like, good. And then she just totally annihilates the bird. And then they eat it after, which that does make sense, but it's so cruel. And then, like, wouldn't you think that Reed would betray her later on because of that, with how much
it needed to be painted as a more vindictive action on her part, and then there needed to be a lot more fallout from it. And the thing is that animals in fiction are nicer than people, so when they die, it actually carries more impact. So her argument to Reed is like, you stood by while my mom was killed in the same way. And like, yeah, but we care less about her mom than we did a falcon.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how fiction works. In real life, it's not, but in fiction, that's how it works. And so like, it's like, no, this is a much harsher thing to do.
And also, if there had been more of a fallout from it, you know, like, like if he would have been like,
he just moves on.
Yes,
he just
really
moves
does.
on.
If he would have been like, I came here to fucking help you. I kept you from like, he would, you know, I helped you this whole time. I came here to fucking help you. You know, like, I'm your fucking half brother and you killed my Bird? Why the fuck?
Yes, reveal. He is actually, they discuss it. The man that gave her the lodestone is her father, and it's his father, and they both have lodestones. And he's known this whole time that potentially, like, he didn't know for sure to believe it, but then he believes it. And this freaking bird, I just like, I feel like it was such a silly addition.
Because there was no fallout. It could have been, so like, the backstory is the dad appears to Reed and is like, I'm giving you this lodestone, and I need you to go to Bedrock, and I need you to work for this really terrible man who's going to cause some problems. One day, a girl is probably going to come in who is also going to have this lodestone. She's going to be your sister, and I need you to help her. That's why I need you to be there. And young Reed is like, my life has purpose now. And he goes and he does it, and he works for the general. And when he first interacts with her, he realizes she has the lodestone, and he was like, fuck, it's just like mine. This is my sister. I have to help her, which is why he had been doing all the stuff he'd been doing from the start. So he comes and he's tracking her because he thinks she can finally read the map, and he wants to help her get to the Verdant. And like, he is just there to genuinely help people.
I know. Poor Reed. Good Lord.
Reed does not really get enough of a character arc,
He
and
really
that
does.
makes sense now,
And he
considering
deserves
he
it.
probably would have been in like 2 books,
Books.
almost like as a main
Character.
character. So.
He deserved it. He personally was one of the most interesting characters.
He was. That, like, I want to know what his life was like carrying out these acts, because he knew eventually he'd be needed. Is there a religious fervor? Like, did dad also give him like a, the gods are asking you to do this kind of vibe?
Wouldn't it have been cool if, so there's this scene later on, we'll discuss, no spoilers, but there's a scene later on where Reed goes off to do a mission on his own and he goes back to the general. That would have been a stellar opportunity to switch perspectives, honestly.
I legitimately think this book was supposed to be multiple perspectives.
Different perspectives.
And it was supposed to be Reed, Asher, and Delta. I think
that would have been cool.
I think it was supposed to be. I don't know. I'd have to talk to Erin Bowman, but I'm pretty like. But I also like, that's what I would have wanted, because I would have liked the different perspectives, and also because these people have all lived very different lives.
Very different lives
within this waste, and I think having the difference in what, like, so Delta, you realize actually, like, while she's had a hard life, she hasn't had a shit life. Asher has had a shit life. He was tortured as a child, like, because he was like, I want to say 8 or 9.
I don't remember, but he was very young.
He's got all these scars across his front because they couldn't fuck up with his back. He escaped through a sewage system and then got taken in by like human traffickers who he promised to help. Like, they were gonna sell him, but he was like, I'll help you and I'll be an extra hand, and maybe one day you'll let me go. And they're like, yeah, after this many we'll let you go. Like, so that's been his life.
He's been on the run his whole life, and Delta has not. She has been struggling in a different way. And then Reed has played politics his whole life. That's a political version of things.
And it just, I think it would have been so interesting. And again, I don't blame her for this in this book. I think if it had been 3 books and that hadn't happened, that's when I would have actually laid that criticism at her feet and been like, why, missed opportunity, Bowman. Reed gets over the death of his, like, and he doesn't, like, he's still sad about it at later points, but he, like, I wish there would have been anger, or like, and now you can play it, and this would have been something if it was from his point of view, where his whole point of, like, existing within Bedrock and developing the relationship with his Falcon was to find her. So, like, that was the more important thing. So he, like, he knew what he had to do. But I would have liked Delta to feel way more guilty and shitty about it.
Yes, it's completely glossed over. Also, it would have been really nice if he learned to hate Delta through all this. How frustrating, how, like, poor decisions, violence, all these different things. And maybe he could have communed with her, but too much of
like,
this has
you're
been
why
like,
I've been living like this.
Yes, I wish there was some resentment, and I wish, like, because she's so harsh.
And then they could have developed past it, because this would have been,
or it could have been like a hook, because later he has to go do some stuff for her where it's like, okay, there's some actual ambivalence as to
him?
what is he going to be doing. Do we trust him?
Exactly.
That's a lot much more complicated.
And it would have been nice to see their relationship shift from this place of resentment, like him coming to help wholeheartedly, becoming resentful when he sees this action and she thinks he's just as bad as everyone else. Like, I've been waiting for you. You were supposed to be a good thing. I'm supposed to help you, and you're just as bad as everybody else.
And then imagine, we're about to get it again, no spoilers. Imagine after they get to the Verdant, his attitude towards it all.
I think it would have been great, and I would have loved seeing their relationship go from that to familial, or at least not even like fully familial, but the kind of familial where you still have issues with each other, but like
brother and sister.
You don't like each other, but you've grown to love each other. Like, I would have liked that. But anyway, they decide to bring Reed with because they can't leave him on his own, and he wants to help anyway. They end up fixing the wind wagon. They go off, head out. They've got supplies. After a while, they end up finding a giant, square, massive... It's the biggest building she's seen in her life, and she's seen some pretty big structures at this point. It's massive, but it's like really like clean edges, and she tries to find the entrance, and it's been caved in. There's a bunch of rocks there, and so they're like, we have to get in. They're moving rocks. She ends up squeezing in, and it's like described like a government building.
Yeah, essentially.
There's a big safe, like, or not a safe, but like one of those doors that you have to turn, like a pressure seal, and they get inside, and there's a bunch of like computers. She calls them...
It's like a nuclear bunker.
Yeah, she calls them windows that you can't see through is how she describes the computer screens. And then they end up finding all these beds, like tons of beds, tons of rooms, like, and then there is some water and supplies. She is like, this is the Verdant, because it also says Eden above, like when they go in, it says Eden above the door. So she knows this is the right place. And she's like, I don't see how a lush tropical Verdant is going to be inside here, but I know I have to get in. And she's like having like an existential... She's like, what did we come here for?
She also suddenly desperately tries to believe in the gods, and she thinks...
In this moment.
Yeah, she's like, the gods must be here. Even if the Verdant is it, they must be there, and maybe we can access it then. And she's even frightened of the gods for a moment, thinking she's unworthy. And then, of course, we get the big reveal.
Which is Reed, or Asher, one of the guys, has been poking around one of the things, and he hit a screen. Or no, I think it's Delta.
Delta falls asleep, then she wakes up and hits her head, and that's where she finds a recording.
She touches something, and there's a recording playing, and she like clicked it, and it plays this, think Star Trek, or like in Avatar when the guy is talking to, like, not Last Airbender, but the other one where he's talking to the camera and making a log. It's a captain's log.
And she's so freaked out because she's like, where is he behind there?
And she's
it's
like
very
waving
funny.
at
I liked
him.
that.
I liked that.
He basically confesses that this was a penal colony planet. They stripped the planet of its resources, but there was a silent storm, like, and he calls it something else, but they refer to it like in the waste, it's silent storms, and it's basically like this storm that comes across and destroys magnetic fields. So a lot of like their technology just stops working, including within all the penal colony prisoners. They have a chip in their head that controls them and makes them docile, and the chip malfunctions, and all of the like prisoners have an uprising. And what happened is a lot of the like people who are in charge of the planet happened to just go off planet back to space to the main ship, and so they missed it. And he was like the last person, one of the last people left here, and they didn't know this was going to happen. But it turns out this specific planet has solar cycles where the sun goes through every like 100 years massive like flares that cause these auroras, lights in the sky, and magnetic field malfunctions. He explains like there's been this big revolution. He's like, we're calling for help if someone could come. I don't know if you're getting this. And he basically realizes like, crap, like it's just me and these prisoners. He's let them into the bunker because they set off bombs. Like
the planet got nuked from above.
And so he's got all the prisoners, and they're like tolerating him because he let them into the bunker, and he's now like, what do I do with them? But then the chips in their head start working again. Oh, also the mag rifles. So they have these thing called mag rifles, which use magnetics. And so during the solar storm, they stopped working, which is how the guards got overwhelmed by everybody else. And that's how these people got power. But then their chips start working again, and they get really kind of forgetful. Like they know who they are, but they've forgotten the situation, and they keep turning to him
for guidance. Yeah.
So he basically says, we need to go out. We can't survive here forever. We're going to have to try survive on this world. And they keep asking me for answers. And he's like, I'm going to give them answers as best I can. And I'm basically going to tell them the gods left and there's hope. And so he creates their religion, and it's literally simple where these things. So one of the gods is Ateon, and then there's a god named Fetter, but it's Federation. Like this guy wasn't even creative.
Not at all.
She's like, I wonder how many other words we say wrong.
This is the moment she needs air, so she runs out of the bunker because all of the gods are alive. And this is the part that's in Fury Road where Furiosa goes out into the desert and like falls to her knees and is like that. And so I have a couple problems with this twist. On the one hand, it's clever, and this whole time you thought they were on Earth. They're not. They're on a planet. It's the same one from Iron Widow, but I think it's still interesting. Problem is, though, that looking back, the world should have been a lot weirder than it was, and it feels sort of disappointing that it wasn't. So, like, the environment is just Dust Bowl, essentially, but, like, now that we're on an alien planet, it would have been cooler to have, like, some of the weird alien environments you get from, like, for example, in the game Destiny. Like, those have some very weird planets with weird barren landscapes that are nonetheless interesting. And also, there could have been more done with this whole implant thing. Like, maybe it stops them from being able to read, or maybe there were different classes of workers that gives them certain knowledge or not certain knowledge, and they just thought that's how people were, or it was some kind of a magic. And, like, so there all of a sudden is all these excuses for why the world could have been a lot cooler that aren't really there. And the other problem is that inherent in any post-apocalyptic story is sort of an underlying, sort of an environmentalist theme, because this world was one way and now we screwed it up, and that's why this is like it is now. One of the examples I heard is a biologist talking about how The Road is actually one of the most pro green energy works they've ever read, because in that book, all of the vegetation just dies and humanity descends into nothing, into barbarity. And he's like, it goes to show how important the biosphere is and how important our environment is. And so it's not a thing that's explicitly said, but it's implicit within the world. And so now, though, this isn't Earth, it's just another planet, and people just left. So the setting itself doesn't have a critique of anything having to do with, like, how people treated the environment.
I disagree. He literally says they stripped the planet.
I believe it is a critique. I would agree with Maria to some degree. Also, side note, there could be an explanation for why life is so bare there, as far as, like, where's the weird planet life? Where's the alien stuff? They nuked it. Everything should be dead. But then you come across the problem. Why do they have donkeys and chickens?
And why don't they look weird?
Yes, that's true. If they are, like, earth donkeys or whatever, right? Why did they bring them? I could understand, like, certain animals maybe just for, like, resources, but then when they've died in the nuclear explosions, they didn't bring it down to Eden. And also, like, why that? If they're so advanced that they're spaceships and we're using brain chips to have prisoners do these things, wouldn't we just purely have machines for the most part, especially for, like, beasts of burden?
And you can assume that, like, the dust storms would make AI, or, like, the robot dogs that they have from MIT, it's not MIT, whatever it's called, those, like, stopped working. But then, like, it would have been cool world building if it was like, okay, the only animals they have access to were, like, ones that people had as, like, pets or comfort animals. So, like, oh, they have dogs that were once poodles that they've now bred to, like, pull sleds or something like that. Like, that is a cool world building thing. Or maybe they're, like, chimeric animals that were bred to be kind of cool
that would have
looking.
been sick to help with beasts of burden, like almost like mechanical, like some type of
Yeah,
weird
exactly.
animals.
And you could see that how over time they've, like, de-evolved, or, like, maybe they're very rare because they can't breed, because they're just like mules, where mules can't breed.
I'm just wondering, like, but how did the animals survive? How, like, I mean, I guess I don't totally need that answer, but it is a
If it
question.
had been something that Amory had, like, the general that they spoke that did the thing had mentioned, that, like, because you can have a world building standpoint of, like, this planet is too volatile and actually breeding chickens and sheep is a really easy way.
Yes, it could be.
But also rabbits. Why are there rabbits here? Like, that's the
Yes!
rabbits, the sheep and the chicken I can believe, because people
Yes,
would bring them on,
but
like,
why rabbits?
but why rabbits? And, like,
But how much cooler would it have been if they had peacocks for food instead of chickens? Like, oh, some rich Federation dude brought his peacock, and that's what they use for.
I mean, it would have been cool, but, like, chickens are way easier to keep. Peacocks are way harder. Like,
But they don't have access to chicken. But yeah. And so the other thing, though, I think is, in terms of a critique, then, this of environmentalism, this should have been a critique of capitalism.
Yeah.
So, like, have you ever seen, like, in Appalachia, where they just cut the top of a mountain off and it's super bad for the environment? That's how they mine out coal,
Yeah.
or something like that. Or, like, giant holes that are, like, inverted Great Pyramids, where there's a lot of cool things you can do with, like, post-apocalyptic capitalism. and exploiting the environment, that like that's what I would have liked to see.
I think it's okay as is. I understand
As
your
so
point.
much with this book.
Yes, but also another thing is it mimics it with the general and also with the prime. They're both capitalists in a weird way. Like they're both trading and stuff. One thing that really killed me, like I felt so bad for the prisoners. It specifically mentioned that the prisoners they're using under mind control on this alien planet for beasts of burden only committed minor crimes. I was like, what? They're here for like what?
It was Australia.
Pirating I know. What? Pirating a video? Like why are they here? Did they smoke crack?
But also, like, you know, Australia is a really good example to use of some of the things you both were saying. Like, Australia's got weird animal life because it's not like any other like like evolutionary like
Marsupials.
thing that happened. You know, like we don't have kangaroos or something that looks like kangaroos pretty much anywhere else. And so it's so and so I was looking for that uniqueness of like, oh, this is an alien world. I think I agree with Will. I wish there would have been more ideas. And I again, I don't mind the idea of chickens and goats.
Yes, I don't either.
I can see that being brought.
Also, wouldn't it have been cool if the animals they did bring or something, or even the native animals originally, if there were some, because you also have to imagine maybe evolution didn't work out that way or it didn't get that far, is they mutated.
So what could have been cool too is like there was originally a biome of alien life, and they put a bit of humanity down in Earth, and now that alien life is beginning to come back in and like slowly choke away. So it's not that like the land is like dying of water, it's that, you know, these weird alien plant life is coming back, like
And it's a danger now.
yeah, like the mind worms from Alpha Centauri, where it's like just writhing carpets of these xeno aliens that make you go insane, or something cool like that. Or like they have to learn to be more in touch with the alien land, whereas the general is trying to hold on to the human way of doing things. There's a lot of ideas you can play with there, and it makes it kind of like, really?
The easiest way to fix this, honestly, would have been just that people abandoned Earth. Like that it was a federation and they just decided to abandon Earth.
That would have been cool, yeah.
And that way you don't have to be like, well, the chickens and goats. You know, like you can still have your chickens, you can still have your goats, you can still have the rabbits. You don't have to explain that. You don't have to worry about like or people going, I would have loved some cool alien landscape. You could have just been like the same exact plot, but it was literally just Earth got abandoned. Like maybe there was an uprising where like Earth was no longer like a place where humanity lived. It was just being used as a resource funnel. And the people were working there could have still been penal colonists, like not colonists, but like it could have been like you get to stay on Earth instead of the rest of the nice planets we now have because of your crimes. And it could have been like Earth has devolved into that it is literally a prison planet because that's how shitty we've been to it, and that would have fixed everything.
You could even have like an Elysium thing where they see the ring in the sky that are the gods, where they all lived, and well, they were down on the planet, and like there's that's what's kind of frustrating sometimes about when sci-fi or fantasy writers write sci-fi or fantasy. They don't know enough to write anything really cool. They're just like, I just want a Western with a little bit of a tinge of post-apocalyptic about it. And like they can't delve into these really interesting ideas and instill them into the story.
What for me, and this is one of those places where I was saying the style of writing of Wrath and Dawn could have worked more here, because like her coming to terms with this, like, and I'm gonna use Fury Road, because when Furiosa finds out that she already went through the green place and the green place doesn't exist anymore and it's that shitty swampy place with the people on sticks, her reaction is so visceral and just like and you can't write that. Like that moment of Charlize Theron just being like, ah, and the music and the scene, you can't capture that in a book. But the way the lady wrote in the other thing, like I said, my problem with her was there was emotional things happening, but I didn't think they'd been earned previously, but there was an emotionality to them that you felt in the moment. The scene itself was great. And here, the emotionality absolutely could have been earned, but I just don't think Bowman's writing style lends itself to, like, her descriptions are fine for like a desolate, like her, I don't want to say her descriptions are barren because it's not like Jenna Moreci where it's just a lack of descriptions, but they have this kind of bare boneness to them. So when she's writing these really emotional moments, they don't impact like they should. And it happened during the like, there's gonna be a fight scene and stuff, and like stuff happening, and I never like And I cry pretty easy in books, guys.
I didn't cry, but I got really choked up when the bird died.
I didn't cry, but I got really choked up when the bird died, and we get the bird like twice. Anyway, so the original general, leads them out into the wastes, and he leads them, and they believe in the gods. And generations pass, and slowly but surely, they just they never knew in the first place, but there's no guidance. And so now we get where we are now. So once they've realized this, it's a really hard moment to figure out what to do next. And so they're like, okay, we found these mag guns here. And the general in the video said that the mag guns didn't work during the dust storm. And then Delta has an idea, and she thinks, oh, why don't we trade with this general, the evil one, give him the mag guns, and then attack with Powder Town during one of the storms, because it just so happens that every 160 some odd years that these storms are supposed to happen in huge masses. And it's supposed to happen now. How they know that, I'm not sure. Oh, it keeps happening. Yeah,
it's building up just like before. I remember now. I was thinking of Riddick with the little solar system, and I was like, wait, they didn't have that. So she has this idea, and they're like, okay, well, this is an idea. Let's go. So they go off with whatever rations they can get. And unfortunately, on the way there, loyalists find them, if I'm correct, right?
There are some loyalists. There's 3 loyalists.
Yes, but they kill them. It's fine.
There was a sandstorm, and it killed them for them.
And so anyway, they get back to Powder Town, and it takes a hot second, but they do get in pretty quickly. It's because they're like, we found the verdant. We have a way to beat the general. Please let us in. And then instantly everyone's like, green goddess to Delta.
I did not like this.
Oh my God, I hated it. What a twist to she's a nobody and all of a sudden this, and it's just her word. Where's the proof? And so anyway, they don't even show the back or anything. There's nothing to support her thesis or her claim. They talk to the Trinity, and the Trinity is like, wow, that's a stupid plan, Delta. How do we know for sure that
a storm's gonna happen?
Yeah, and at the right time. And she's like, you haven't thought this through. And so the Prime's like, we've had an idea this whole time, and we've intended to essentially booby trap the black powder so it explodes in their supply area, and then we attack. Well, the Prime wants to use the mag guns herself with her forces, and she thinks that'll be a lot easier if they blow up and then invade. And so this is where Reed comes in, and they're like, we need an in-man, and Reed's that in-man.
They basically are like, Reed, we need to test if you're loyal, and Reed ends up, when the loyalist died earlier, he ends up getting one of the other dude's falcons named Ember, and they're like, we can, use Reed, and we're gonna, number one, see if he's loyal. He proves to be loyal. He kills a bunch of loyalists. And they were like, we're gonna send Reed back to Powder Town. He'll get comfortable, and then after 9 months or nearly a year, because by then the solar cycles will be done, so we don't have to worry about the mag guns not working for us. He'll blow up because the Prime tried to do this previously once before. Reed figured it out, and that's how the Prime lost her eye. She only has one eye. So the Prime is super fuck Reed, and that's why
not a fan.
Not a fan. And so they send, after he's proven himself, they send him back, and basically in a year you're gonna blow up the thing. Once that happens, we'll roll out, and specifically we're gonna use this wind wagon design because they designed cannons to break down the walls of Bedrock. They're building their wind wagons, they're getting their supplies together, readying for the plan. Reed goes off. She's kind of sad. Asher's like, I don't trust him. All of a sudden, 3 months in, the black powder blows, and they're like, why did Reed blow it now? That's really dumb. But it just so happens to be in a silent spot between 2 of the solar storms, and they were like, are we supposed to go now? Did Reed defect? What do we do? And then the Prime and Delta are basically like, nah, Reed would have done this for a reason. If he did this, we gotta go. So they only have 13 or they don't have as many wind wagons as they were supposed to, but they roll up. They've got about 300 people with them. They've got the cannons. They get there. There's a battle. They're fighting. Harley's entire wind wagon gets blown up. Asher was on that wind wagon, so Delta thinks he's dead. Again, the emotionality of these moments don't hit as much as they should. But she gets in. She ends up getting up into because the Prime's like, go kill the general, and Delta's like, I got you. So she escapes in. She goes to the nursery, and the nursery lady's like, are you gonna kill the babies? Then starts crying, which gets Delta caught. And then it's some people, and then Reed comes up and he's like, I'll take her to the general. And they were like, you said she was dead, dude. And he was like, I thought she was dead. She's magical. She went to the verdant. She must be a goddess. And they're like, Maybe that sounds plausible.
Yeah, that sounds realistic.
That was such a weird moment.
They end up like killing those guards. They go to the general's room. The general's hidden, and they're like, "Where is he?" But he's hiding behind a metal plate that was covering a tunnel in the wall. He ends up getting Reed, and he's got Reed, and he's like, "I dare you to shoot me. You'll kill him." And she ends up making a decision, which was really great. Was like, she is gonna hit Reed, but she'll get the general as well. So like she shoots through his one arm, and it gets the general. But then they fight. Blah blah blah. The general's like, "I needed to get to the verdant. I was there. The pot is running out. What?" And then at one point, like, I don't know, she kills him. Reed passes out. She kills the general. And then before Reed passes out, he's like, "You have to blow the horn. If you blow the horn and you have the stars, the god stars,
the necklace,
they'll listen to you." So she blows the horn. Nobody's listening to her. She gets the necklace off the dead body. She holds it up, puts it on. The loyalists put their stuff down. Huzzah, they won. And they're basically, the idea is they're going to look past the bedrock, has a bunch of like mountains past it. And they're like, "What's behind there? We don't know. There could be more water. Maybe the water's running out for a reason we can solve." And so basically, Bedrock now becomes a part of like an extension of Powder Town. Prime is like, "I'd like you to become my fourth. We're going to be a quartet. And you'll be Delta, the like divine." And she's like, no, I don't want to be a religious figure. I think that's really weird, especially now that we know, because the Prime's like, "We're not going to tell anyone the gods don't exist. We don't need our entire fighting force having existential crises right now." Which, from a leadership point of view, correct. But you eventually have to create a way to get out of that. But anyway, so Delta basically says, like, "I'm not going to perpetuate this. If people want to believe, I won't take it away from them. But if people ask me for the truth, I'm going to give it to them." And so they're like, "Okay, you shall be Delta the Verity." She ends up getting Bay back. And this was the one scene that got a little emotional for me, because she goes to see Bay, and at first she's like, "That's not the same child. This baby's fucking huge." Because it's been, months, and the baby's been healthy and well fed. Because what he does is he, like, keeps the babies, and then if they show, like, when they're around 7, like, signs of being God touched, then, things happen. But if they don't, they just end up working the fields. And so she's a fat, happy baby. But then, like, when she goes to hold her, she cries and she doesn't know who she is. And so the nurse lady comes and takes her. And it's just a touching moment in of her. And this is the part where she says, the Delta always leads back to the Bay. And it was just like a cute, and it was the one moment that got me emotionally, because she had spent time with Bay. And as much as I think I wish she had spent more time with her. And again, if it had been just a book of her traveling with Bay for longer, it would have worked beautifully. And then Bay was
lone wolf and cub, but in the post-apocalypse.
So the story wraps up right around there. And
the Prime's like, "Go off, Delta. I want you to be the explorer." And she's like, "Asher, are you coming with?" Oh, her and Asher finally, like, almost consummated earlier, like, in Powder Town before the invasion. It's established Reed, who lost his arm, is going to go travel with her. Again, their relationship as siblings could have been developed more. Her and Asher have a moment, and then it just ends with her being like, "I shall go off and try to find out what's happening with the water." And that's how it ends. It was a perfectly decent book.
It is perfectly decent. I agree with that. And, like, so much of what we've talked about is, like, it works, or this element works, but it could have been really cool and better.
Yeah, so she has a lot of potential. And I would say, like, I remember on the interview, she was really nervous about reviews and stuff, as any author would be. I really felt for her, especially now that I finished the book. I'm like, nah, bro, like, you did a good job. You really got screwed over not to be able to, like, that's like asking a painter not to use their medium.
Or to try paint their entire painting, but in this
without a paintbrush.
No, on this much of the canvas.
Oh, yeah, that's
like
better. Yeah, paint a Picasso, but in one little tiny thing, and with no ability to create vast detail. And I'm sure if she happens to see this, although I don't know how realistic that is, good job.
Given the restraints.
This book reminded me of a problem I consistently have, and probably one of the reasons I stopped reading for so long, which is that I want a certain kind of, like, YA-ish type plot. Like, that's just what I like. But I need the writing level to be, like, Hyperion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm always stuck with, like, this, like, either it's really well written, but I'm kind of like, I don't really want to read it that much, though in Hyperion's case I do. Or it's like, I like the underlying kind of tropes and story, but, like, it's not written as well. And I think that's why I gravitated to fan fiction for so long. Is because, like, you actually can get really good writing there.
As a wrap up, again, I stand by what I said. If this had the writing of Wrath and Dawn, the expansiveness, and it didn't necessarily, I think she could have gotten there if she'd actually had 3 books. But in the amount of time she had, I think having the writing style of Wrath and Dawn would have helped get those emotional moments where like like we didn't have as much buildup as I think if we'd been living with these characters for 3 books would have paid off without having that really beautiful writing style. Because like you can have that pay off without that writing style, but in 1 book, I think having that writing style helps. Because again, Wrath and Dawn wrote some like emotional scenes. They weren't earned.
No fundamentals, yeah.
And where this, I think the fundamentals were there for what this book was trying to do, but the writing style just didn't get like I never
couldn't quite get there. Yeah,
read it. It's interesting, especially if you're a fan of Fury Road and Waterworld.
Anyway, that is Dustborn.
Thanks for listening, guys. Thank you guys for sticking around. You're wonderful.
Let us know in the comments what books you'd like us to read. That's something you guys seem to like doing. Are there other post-apocalyptic books that you guys do think are good that you want us to read? Because we're always interested in that kind of a thing. I'm not reading The Road because I don't want to be depressed. All right, we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Farewell.
Bye, guys. Bye.